Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We're glad you're able to join us to kick off the first of many expert sessions planned for 2025, provided by the Sashbear Foundation. I'm Carol Moffat, and I have the privilege of being a volunteer with the Sashbear Foundation and a family member who has benefited from the programs and resources offered by Sashbear. And I'm excited to be here with you tonight to explore the book by Dr. Blaise Aguirre, I Hate Myself, and other such statements as we may hear from our loved ones. We are joined this evening by Lynn Curry and Mike Menu, the co-founders of the Sashbear Foundation, and with Kathleen, Barb, and Lauren. They're the magic behind the scenes. The Sashbear Foundation is a Canadian charity recognized nationally and internationally as a leading voice for families impacted by emotion dysregulation, suicidality, and related mental health challenges. Lastly, and important, if you want to ensure Sashbear is able to continue their programming free of charge, yes, free, no one pays to get educated through Sashbear, you can go to the website and make a donation to the Sashbear Foundation. Every dollar helps. And now I'm going to pass it over to Mike to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Carol. So let me introduce Dr. Blaise Aguirre for you. Dr. Blaise Aguirre is a child and adolescent psychiatrist and an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He's a trainer in and specializes in dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, as well as other treatments for borderline personality disorder and associated conditions. He is the founding medical director of 3 East Continuum of Care, an array of programs for teens that uses DBT to target self-endangering behaviors, as well as the symptoms of borderline personality disorder traits. Dr. Aguirre has been a staff psychiatrist at McLean Hospital since 2000 and is nationally and internationally recognized for his extensive work in the treatment of mood and personality disorders in adolescents. He lectures regularly throughout the world. Dr. Aguirre is also the author or co-author of multiple books, including Borderline Personality Disorder in Adolescents, Mindfulness for Borderline Personality Disorder, Coping with BPD, and Best-Selling DBT for Dummies. So I've known Blaise for 14 years and had the pleasure of collaborating with him on many Sashbear initiatives. So it's a delight to have Blaise with us today, sharing with you information in his new book, I Hate Myself. And to that end, I'm going to turn it over back to Carol.
Thank you. All right, let's get started. Can you provide a synopsis of the book to set context, or give us your elevator pitch, just so we kind of have a summary before we jump into the questions about this topic?
Yeah. So one of the things that I found in the work that I do with mostly very, very self-destructive young people, just like wonderful, beautiful souls, beautiful minds, just like often deeply talented, highly emotional, highly sensitive people, that even though they could overcome a lot of, to label them psychiatric symptoms, symptoms like self-injury, symptoms like depression or anxiety, there was a group of young people who persisted in suffering even when a lot of those symptoms lifted. And when I wondered what it was, they would say to me, it's because I hate myself. And it was such a confusing idea. And because I thought, like, wait, you're like wonderful. Like, what do you mean you hate yourself? Nobody else hates you. But there was this piece that of self-hatred. And when I started to examine the records of a lot of the people who tragically had completed suicide, many of them talked about self-hatred. And I thought, wait a second, is this another factor in suicidal thinking and behavior that we haven't addressed? And it turns out that we had. And yet, here's a factor that is so powerful in terms of inducing suicidal thoughts and behaviors, and yet none of the therapies address self-hatred. And it was one of those aha moments of just saying, maybe we haven't addressed this. And so, over the years, so most books I can do in about 6 months to a year. I've written 20 books, but then there was this piece that was not addressed, that mental health hadn't touched. And I thought it's time to really understand this phenomenon. Yeah.
So Blaise, one of the questions that I have is like, what is it about now, this book coming out now? Can you tell us if there's any like context or any triggers or anything that kind of convince you that this is the time that this is needed now?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. I mean, I've been thinking about it for a long time. And it's one of those things that, you sort of think about and, maybe forget about, think about, forget about. But in recent times, especially with people who were stuck with a lot of suicidal and self-destructive thinking, I don't know, maybe it was just the number of people that I've treated over time that it just got me asking the question a lot more. And the more I asked, the more people said, yeah, of course I hate myself. And they said it with a degree of certainty that was somewhat surprising to me. And I've been thinking about it for a long time. I started writing the words at the beginning of last year, and I just started collecting stories, collecting ideas. And it's one of those things like, like a good creme brulee, like you put everything together and out comes this perfect thing. And it's, so it's putting the stories, putting the narratives, looking at the research, looking at treatment approaches, etc. That as I started to look into all of these things and speak to people, it all just coalesced, and there it was. So whereas all the other books, I've had a sense of, this is what is needed. It has to be out by a certain amount of time. This was more amorphous. It was like this beautiful cloud that all just came together and then created this idea that came together. So I don't actually have an answer other than it's been on my mind for a long time.
And I imagine it sounds like it was a lot of things as you started to dig into deeper, the things that you realized made it almost more urgent to write the book because it was kind of like you realize how important the subject is, right? Because when I just read when I read the title, I said, oh, this is like a really important thing to read. So that was just what I was feeling.
Yeah. What happened was that the more I started to ask people, the more something really interesting came out, and that is that people with a lot of self-hatred felt very, very strongly that they were a burden to the people that they cared about. And nothing could be further than the truth. They felt that they were a burden to me, their parents. And they would often say, the world would be better off without me. And that was about as certain a thought as they had, and that it wouldn't change. They were absolutely certain that they were such a drain on their family, such a burden, that this thing needed to, that was the way out. And they really believed that their families, their friends, the people they care about would be better off without them. And as I started to speak to more and more people, and as they started to share more and more that this was their experience, I thought, we've got to get on top of this. This is a symptom that we have to get on top of, because it's such a massive vulnerability factor and it's also an untrue factor, because most of us who love, whether it's your child, your partner, the patients that I treat, I love most of my patients. Some of them are a pain in the ass. I don't know if you can say ass here, but I was going to say they're a pain in the ass. But I love them, and it's just like, wait a second, you're not a burden, but you absolutely believe that this is true. So I just felt that we had to tackle this significant vulnerability factor to suicide.
Who is the book for? Who should be reading this book besides everybody?
Yeah, well, so I think a lot of people with mental illness often are stigmatized and feel like second-class citizens. Um, and I really wanted to speak to them. So, I really wanted to be for people with lived experience. Now, a lot of therapists said, hey, we don't know what to do. You should write a book for us. And I thought, you're not the ones who are suffering. So I really wanted to write to the people with lived experience to say, you've developed this belief about yourself that is fake news, and I'm gonna help you undo it, even though you believe it won't happen. Now, what happened is, in the context of writing that to to the person with lived experience, many of my colleagues and therapists said, "Hey, will it be able to help us as a therapist in helping our patients who've got self-hatred?" And the answer to that is yes, because it lifts the veil and demystifies this construct of self-hatred. And I've had many therapists who come to me and saying, "What do you do about self-hatred? Like, what, and we don't know what to do." So primarily it's for those with lived experience, but definitely therapists and parents can read it as well. I think, I mean, people are different kinds of thinkers. I mean, there's some people who are very linear, who start at the beginning and finish at the end. Other people sort of jump around. And one of the things that, because some of my patients looked at my early drafts, and, they were really excited about, they were less excited about like how it develops, for instance, because they know how it develops. They were much more interested in, what do I do about it? Others were very confused about, this idea that it develops. They thought that it was something that was part of them all along. And so they want to read it from start to finish. And I have ways that I meander through my thinking. And I think that that's reflected in the book as well. So, there's sections that might seem, the concept of self is a very philosophical chapter that people might say, I'm just not interested in that. So I think that somebody can actually pick up the book, look at the table of contents, look at the chapters, and say, that's where I want to start, and you can do it that way. If you think about the concept of pathology, and you think about, let's just say that you take any illness, say you take high blood pressure, say diabetes, arthritis, in any condition, that there comes a point at which the blood pressure is so high, the blood sugar is so high, that it actually causes dysfunction in your life. It impacts the quality of your life. Now, all of us can have a little degree of self-criticism, self-judgment, self-reproach, self-judgment, and that's okay. I mean, sort of, if it's helping you to say, to push you further, to say, I could have done this better, I could have tried harder, fine. But when this concept of self infuses your DNA, your sense of everything about you, it impacts your relationships, your work, your relationship with your loved ones, your relationship with yourself, how you approach social and other situations and work situations, then I think it's pathological, because it's impacting the quality of your life. So to me, anything that really impacts the quality of your life in an aversive way is what I would consider pathological. That they could be like, I hate that I'm not exercising. Well, there's a solution to that. I hate that I'm eating highly processed foods. Well, there's a solution to that. I really don't like my job. Well, might there be an opportunity to change it? That when you sort of think about, I hate my life, you can often think of it as something that is outside of you, that is amenable possibly to change. And now, if you start to internalize that, and that the reason that you hate your life is because of the you-ness that is you, that it wouldn't matter if everything was wonderful around you, that still, because you conceive of yourself as this really flawed individual, then it doesn't matter what happens on the outside. You get the best job, you get the best partner, you get the children who listen to you, but you're still hating yourself. So nothing in the outside can change for the people who've got core self-hatred to stop them from hating themselves. Whereas for people who have a certain degree of dissatisfaction, it's like, I've been really lazy, I'm really not liking myself, I haven't gone to the gym in the last 2 weeks. Well, it's like, okay, well, that's something that you can change, and that you'll start feeling better about yourself in a couple of weeks. For people with core self-hatred, none of those behaviors and none of those activities change how they feel about themselves. And that's what was really interesting to me, because I could get people to feel happier through exercise and through eating more healthy, by going to bed earlier, by not being on TikTok until 3 o'clock in the morning, scrolling. A lot of those things would change in people who were dissatisfied with their life by changing those behavioral entities, or those behaviors. But for people with core self-hatred, none of that, making any of those changes didn't change how they felt about themselves. Yeah, so as many people who know me know, I started a unit in 2007, mostly to treat people with borderline personality disorder, many of whom have post-traumatic stress disorder. And then I've helped out in other units, eating disorder units, and other units. And it was interesting because there were groups of patients in all of those units across the diagnostic spectrum who said that they had this core self-hatred. And I was actually asked to write an op-ed piece, to propose the idea of self-hatred as its own entity. So you're absolutely right. It does seem to be transdiagnostic, and not just for people with BPD. But for me, it was only for people with BPD, because that's all that I was seeing. But then it was when I started to travel in much, much bigger circles, in terms of mental health conditions, that there were people that didn't have BPD who still hated themselves. So that was really interesting. Yeah, no, great questions. So one thing that was really interesting to me was that many of the young people who I saw when I opened the unit in 2017, 18 years later, are now young adults. And for people without core self-hatred, when they were adults, I never met an adult person who said that they were fine throughout their childhood and then started hating themselves. I'm sure it's possible that there are people out there who maybe start hating themselves later on in life, but for the group of people that I was working with, I never saw it. And when I interviewed people who had core self-hatred and I asked them, when did it start? All of them tell me that it started in childhood and around the time of kindergarten. And when I asked them, when was do you ever remember caring about yourself? They don't necessarily remember caring about themselves, but they remember really starting to dislike themselves very, very early on. Now, I have not met a single parent in my entire life who's ever said, I want my child to hate themselves. And so then how does this child start to be very, very dissatisfied? And one thing was very common with all the patients that I treated. Number one was that they were all highly sensitive people. I did not meet a person that was not highly sensitive who hated themselves. So number one, highly sensitive. Number two, some pretty significant aversive or hurtful, traumatic early childhood experience. So maybe it was physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and followed by a lot of invalidation, and followed by maybe stuff going on in other elements in their school. And one of the things that these children would often say is that they had no one that they could turn to. Now, I've had many children who've now young teenagers who also had those experiences, who don't hate themselves, but they felt that they had a mother, a father, an uncle, and aunt that they could turn to who cared about them deeply. But in this cohort of young people who were hurt very, very early on, uh, uh, maybe they saw that their siblings weren't being hurt in a similar kind of way, or maybe that their reactions weren't similar to the ones that they had. So remember that I think of sensitivity, emotional sensitivity, as like a super glue. And so that if you think about like one of those fly catchers that, the fly flies by it and then it gets stuck. So for highly sensitive people, if you say something like, oh, you're so stupid for doing that, oh, like stop whining or whatever it is, if you're highly sensitive, those labels begin to stick. And when you're young, you can't contextualize life. Your perspective is very, very narrow. It is, you're surrounding yourself by your caregivers, your school people, your friends, and other people. And as a highly sensitive person, you react in a certain kind of way. And often those kinds of reactions get punished. And so the only conclusion that the child can come up with is that they're somehow flawed. There is something fundamentally wrong with me because these bad things happen to me. People say very, very hurtful things. As adults, yeah, they might still hurt, but we can brush it off as, that person was ignorant or whatever it is. But as a child, it's the only thing that you learn. And that you then begin to learn that you are a flawed individual. And who likes flawed individuals? And we know in nature, what happens to the runt of the pack? They get left in nature. And so they feel like the runt. They feel like discarded, unwanted. And so I don't know, if the rest of the world seems okay, there must be something wrong with me. And how can anyone love someone as flawed as I am? And so how can I love myself for being so flawed? And then what happens is that as they go on in life, they filter all experiences through that concept of flawed self. So that when bad things happen, it reinforces the idea that they're flawed. And when good things happen, they discount it. They discard it. That was just luck. Good things don't happen to me. So, and then, as parents, and you ask the other question is like, is there something that we can see? And, if you've got a child with maybe anxiety, maybe the outside manifestation is a lot of jitteriness and a lot of worry. Or if you've got somebody with depression, is that they're not bathing and they're staying in their room. Or you've got somebody with ADHD and they're very distracted and bouncing from one idea to the next. But with self-hatred, how does it manifest? And I think there are typically they come out in statements like, I'm so stupid, like I'm so, no one loves me, those kinds of things. And they seem so preposterous to us as parents and as caregivers. Like, of course you're not stupid. Of course people like you. And so we tend to dismiss those statements as if they were, kind of ridiculous. And yet, for the person with lived experience, those feel very real to themselves. And the fact that you're telling them that they're being ridiculous is another manifestation of how flawed they are because they can't see it. So there's a lot of self-critical statements. And then the other thing is that I've seen recently is a lot of people-pleasing behavior. That I am so flawed that the only thing that I can do is to try to please other people at my own cost. So that's another element. Well, Mike, I mean, you're not Lynn, yeah? You and Lynn are very separate entities. I mean, you're together, but I'm saying you've got your own mind, Lynn has her own mind. Okay, now imagine me telling you that you are Lynn, and you have to think like Lynn, act like Lynn, behave like Lynn, be as charming as Lynn is, and all of those sorts of things. It would be preposterous as an idea because you're not Lynn. it doesn't matter how much you try. Fundamentally, you're never going to believe that you are Lynn. And so the problem is that if you believe that you are flawed with and hate yourself, the idea of somebody telling you that it's not true, that you should be practicing self-love, doesn't land, because it's just not going to be true. It wouldn't matter. And if, especially if I kept saying, come on, Mike, you've got to be Lynn, you'd say, listen, stop it. Now you're being invalidating, you're being annoying. It's just not true. So now if I were to say, Mike, you have 5 drinks every night, you should go down, you could say, well, maybe that's true. Okay, I'm going to try 3. So, that's measurable, but you cannot not be you. And so I think that when I'm talking about this core self-hatred, the concept, the construct is inseparable from the sense of self. And so the idea that you can challenge that is preposterous in their mind. So yes, you can stop someone from self-injuring. Yes, you can have someone get up on time. Yes, you can have someone go to the gym. Yes, you can have someone show up at work on time. Yes, you can have somebody, come to the dinner table. All of those are behaviors, but it doesn't change this idea. So that's why, whereas we know that self-compassion works so well for people with anxiety and with depression and with other conditions, you see an elevation in mood. You see a greater capability in functioning interpersonally. But when it comes to people with core self-loathing, it doesn't work. And actually, they find it very invalidating. Sure, sure. Okay, so a really great question. So in terms of highly sensitive person, that is probably much more biological. I mean, ultimately, it's all biology because we're biological beings, sentient beings. But and what I mean by that is you feel things quicker than other people. So you tend to feel like emotions quicker than other people. You tend to feel them more intensely than other people. When you're feeling intense emotions, it takes you longer to get to your emotional baseline. And then there tends to be a lot of mood dependent behavior. So when you're in a good mood, you can get almost anything done. When you're in a bad mood, it's very hard to get things done. So highly sensitive people, it's a little bit like, somebody who's allergic to, say, peanut butter, that if they have, you get people with maybe mild sensitivity and then people who are highly sensitive. So emotions for highly sensitive people are very, very powerful. They feel them quicker, they feel them more intensely with seemingly less provocation. And that tends to be biological. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. I am a highly sensitive person. It's just that I know how to manage that high sensitivity. It would be as if you had a Porsche versus a golf cart, sort of having a high-powered engine that you either are able to manage or not able to manage. So that's just in terms of the high sensitivity. Now, here's what's interesting. I grew up in South Africa, and so I've traveled all around the world, and I've thought a lot about this question. And I go to certain like rural areas in South Africa. I see zero self-hatred. I see so much joy and so much happiness. But you see, our Western world markets to self-hatred. You're not thin enough. You're not pretty enough. Your hair's not nice enough. Your body isn't shaped nice enough. You don't have a six-pack. You're not intelligent enough. You don't speak enough languages. You're not good enough. But by the way, if you buy my product, you'll be pretty damn awesome. And so the messaging that we're getting is that we're not enough. And it's so competitive. Oh, you didn't do as well as that other kid in the test. You're not going to get into the better school. And so it's interesting in terms of the socioeconomic question, because I've had patients who've got, who fly in on private jets to come and see me. And they hate themselves. They have every possible thing that they could want in the world, and they're just so unhappy and so miserable. And then I've had people who come from the other end of the spectrum, who's struggling a lot, and they don't like themselves either. So I think it spans, it goes across all socioeconomic groups, and I think that when the child feels safe, when the child feels understood, and when the child feels seen, and is able to, express like what it experiences, and it can be validated, that's the protective element. So I haven't seen, that it's only kind of, people of certain wealth from a certain socioeconomic, certain demographic, race or religion or anything like that, that I haven't seen. Yeah, I don't think we have enough data just yet, but I do think that we market to self-hatred. But maybe we've done it all along, ever since, ads went out there, saying, oh, if you buy this dress or these pair of pants or whatever it is. But I think that there's two things. One is there's a volume of messaging, that if you scroll through your social media and the algorithms say, oh, wow, you're looking at bikinis all the time, you're looking at abs all the time, you're looking at skin colors, skin tones all the time, that then you'll start to get more and more, the algorithm will send you more and more of those messages, and you'll then start to compare yourself more and more. And then what we do is we start to compare instead of connect. And when we compare, we don't like ourselves as much because these are quote unquote perfect beings. We don't think about them as having filtered their or curated their photos through lenses and Photoshop and all of that sort of stuff. But if I could only be as they are, then I would be happy. So that they have this concept of an externalization. So I think that people are getting bombarded with more and more messages that they're not enough. I just don't know if I don't think, because self-hatred hasn't been researched at all, I just don't know if we have enough data to say that it is true. From an intuitive point of view, I think it is. I think it worsens it. But I also think that people are distracted. I think having the nuclear family has made things a little bit worse because there aren't grandmas and uncles and aunts and neighbors who can just like take the child under their arm and saying, hey, you're all right. We aren't out in the farm. I haven't met too many people out, who are maybe kind of from rural areas who have that much self-hatred. So and again, I mean, not that I come across that many, but when you're running around barefoot in the woods, throwing pine cones at people, and I don't know, I just think like you're probably not gonna have so much dislike for yourself. Yeah. So first of all, it is one of the ways in which I started to work with people had to tell me that they believed categorically that self-hatred would not change. I didn't necessarily want to work with people who were occasionally dissatisfied, like sort of Carol was saying, oh, I hate my life right now, whatever it is. I wanted people who said like, no, I do not believe that this is going to change. So, because if it worked for them, then all the other sort of subcategories of self-judgment, self-criticism, it ought to work for them. So the idea that came to mind, first of all, was that a child is not born hating itself. It cannot be. And so it has to learn how to hate itself. And if you think a little bit about this, like what language, and everybody, all the listeners can speak, can answer this question for themselves. What language did you grow up speaking? You'll say French or Spanish or Australian for our Australian friends, South African, or English, whatever it is. Why? Well, because the family that you were born into taught you that language. You weren't born speaking German unless you were born to a German family. You had to learn those things. So self-hatred does not come naturally. It does not come naturally to the human soul, the human mind, the human body. It has to learn to hate itself. Who are the teachers? So once you introduce the idea that you had to learn how to hate yourself, then you can introduce the idea that you can learn how to love yourself. But not only, you're not overriding self-hatred, you're also saying you learn to hate yourself, but you had teachers who taught you that you weren't worthy. Your abuser, the bullies at the school, the people who belittled you, those were your teachers. And they were cruel teachers. They were harsh teachers. They didn't care about you, but you don't have to listen to them anymore because those lessons were false lessons. So when you introduce the idea that it was learned behavior, is when you can start to unwind. You've created a wedge between the self and this learned behavior, and then you can start seeing, little acts of self-care, like brushing your teeth, making yourself a good breakfast, whatever it is, as small little acts of self-compassion and self-care. And that self-care is self-compassion. Going to therapy on time every day or every week is self-compassion. So these little acts. So it, rather than trying to hit it with a hammer and saying, no, you got to love yourself and we all love you and all of these sorts of things, like you've learned this, you've learned something that was incorrect. And by the way, we try to, people play a musical instrument incorrectly or ride a bicycle incorrectly or speak a language incorrectly. We're there to kind of modify it and correct it. This was a learned behavior, a learned construct, and that you can unlearn it and learn something that's more correct. I mean, I think that's, I think that there's a lot of truth in that statement, that because even, I know a couple of kids who've had pretty significant childhood sexual abuse, and they would go to their loving parent, or loving parents, maybe the abuser was somebody, a relative in the family, and they would say, such and such a person is touching me or hurting me, and maybe the parent, for their own reasons, were protective of the child in the sense of saying, oh, they would never do that. It's okay, you've got us. So it could be in a very, very loving way. But the message that the child is getting is that they've got some sort of faulty wiring, so that there's effectively an invalidation that's sort of taking place. And it's been interesting with my patients with core self-loathing, this concept of epistemic trust, like that they trust me because I've done this work for a long time, or I've helped other people. Even that's really, really difficult, because any form of me showing them care is very threatening. Wait a second, you're showing me care? I've had people who showed me care. They were the ones who hurt me. So what exactly does it mean? So you have to sort of balance this as they do their work. Well, I get invited to, as Mike was saying earlier, invited to teach all over the world. And I have been inundated by requests from psychology and psychiatry faculties to discuss this topic. And very, very senior people feel that it's a sort of a revolution in thinking, because they haven't thought about it. So there isn't anyone. And so, I mean, part of my, and getting back to Mike's question, like, well, why now and everything, I also felt like I needed to put something out there that would get people starting to talk about this epidemic of self-hatred. And, the thing about it is that as soon as we start to shine a light on things, people develop ideas, they start talking about it more, and then, we understand things more, whether it's HIV/AIDS, whether it's cancer, whether it's, COVID, whatever it is, we start to understand more, and then we are able to do more. So there wasn't anyone, I mean, I spent 2 years doing literature reviews. There were like 5 papers on self-hatred. There was very, very little information. And yet, it was such a critical risk factor, vulnerability factor in suicidal ideation and completed suicide. Why is it that something that is so lethal in a way hasn't been studied? But it's because we as a community, as a mental health community, haven't asked about it, and patients don't talk about it because they don't see it as a symptom. Very few people go and say, why are you here? He says, well, because I've got a liver. Okay, yeah. I mean, something has to be going wrong, and they don't see it as something that's going wrong. And so so patients don't talk about it, and mental health specialists don't ask about it. So one of the things that I've been doing as I've been lecturing is I've been telling clinicians to ask about it. And by the way, you know how when I went to the dentist the other day, and they said, "Have you ever had this? Are you pregnant?" No, all these sorts of questions. I definitely wasn't pregnant. And okay, so do you hate yourself? How do you see yourself? Do you like yourself? Yeah, I do. Fine. Okay, move on. You don't have to keep on asking about self-hatred. I mean, if somebody doesn't, that's great. But if somebody does, how, you want to drill down on that. So one of the things I'm asking is to include that in the diagnostic questioning, in the same way we ask, do you hear voices? Do you have suicidal thoughts? Do you eat enough? Do you eat too little? Are you binging? Are you purging? Do you have obsessions? Do you have compulsions? Do you hear voices? And those kinds of things. So I'm asking physicians, mental health specialists, psychologists, social workers to ask about it. But I'm also asking patients, and that's one of the things I have in the book, is tell your therapist that you're struggling with self-hatred, that's also a problem. Yeah, okay. I'm an eternal optimist, and I like to think that people want to solve problems as a general rule. So I do think that I think a therapist is much more likely to listen to "I hate myself" versus like "I'm seriously contemplating taking my life." And now the only problem is that what is a therapist then going to do? And but you have to start by having a discussion, and we also have to know what doesn't work. So saying, "Oh, you hate yourself, okay, practice self-love. Oh, you hate yourself, well, don't be silly, you're a wonderful human being. Like you don't believe that," or whatever it is. You have to start off by doing a systematic interview of when did it start, like with anything else. You go in and you have headaches. When did they start? How often do they occur? Do they get worse with certain things? Do they get better with certain things? When did your self-hatred start? Who were the people who were influential in like teaching you that you weren't worth it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then as you come down, then it's sort of like, okay, wait a second. So this person, was maybe misusing you, was abusing you. They told you to be quiet, or that, you'd be hurt. So this person told you that you weren't worth it. They told you that you weren't enough. They told you that you could be misused. That was a false teacher. They were giving you wrong information. But because you were young, you didn't know how to challenge that idea. So it's the therapist has to start like working with the programming that young child was subjected to, and start showing how like it was faulty coding. So I remember there was a family of parents and 3 kids, and the parents and the 2 older kids had gone to this very, very prestigious college, and it was all that existed in this house was just like cups from this, and banners, and etc. And this child neither wanted to go to college, nor did they want to go to that college, and nor did they have the academic aptitude to go to that college. They were extremely artistic and very, very talented. That implicitly, the message walking into that house was, "You'd better go to that college." The parents never said that, actually. They said, "Oh, it would be so great if everybody could have gone to that college." They weren't like, "Hey, you've got to get into that college. You're a terrible child if you don't." But that was the implicit message. This child really struggled with academics. And as this child realized that they could never get into that college because their academic grades, they were neither interested nor did they have the aptitude, but that they loved art, is they started to feel worse and worse and worse about themselves. And eventually, just like, it's clear that my parents would be happy with my two older siblings and not with me because I'm never going to make it. And so they had a tremendous interest in art. And, the parents were, very academically oriented, and they really wanted to bring in tutors for the other kids so that they could learn better and stuff like that. Again, extremely well-meaning, but it wasn't the child's aptitude. So what happened was, that once we realized that they were struggling with a lot of self-hatred, it's, take an interest in what the child is doing. I met a cisgendered 18-year-old boy who was very, very interested in collecting Care Bears. It's a very unusual thing for an 18-year-old boy to collect Care Bears, but that's what he wanted to do. And and he was teased and like, you're not a man and all these sorts of things, but that's what he liked, and I was just saying like, and by the way, I mean, now it turns out that some of the early Care Bears are worth a lot of money, and now they're like, oh wow, that was a great collection. Maybe we should have collected them. But it's taken interest, even if we think about the give skill in DBT, act interested, but really like take an interest in that person's life in a very, very serious way. But the other thing is this: don't dismiss or invalidate statements that say, I'm not good enough, that nobody loves me, that I'm not worthy, and those kinds of things. Take them at face value. Imagine how difficult it would be to hear, nobody loves me, and all of that. But just challenging, just saying, wait a second, Aunt Mary, Uncle Peter, your teacher, the pastor, all love you. Like that never changes anything. But it's just like, first of all, how difficult that would be. So you could just like validate that, but also then ask the question, like, what's going on in your life right now that's how you feel? So really a lot of active listening. But then other skills like opposite action or doesn't seem to work. I can't get people to do opposite action to self-hatred because they believe it's like, how am I going to do opposite action to my hand? It's just my hand. Like, what's opposite action? It's just part of who I am. Mindfulness sometimes just like when they start to pay attention to self-hatred, they say like, okay, like that's actually kind of painful because it just like I'm so aware of how flawed I am. So it's more it's sort of taking active interest even in things that you're not interested in, being very curious, being very open, and then listening to your child. And then when they make accusations of misuse or of bullying, is to actually take them quite seriously. Is to listen and saying, we're going to get to the bottom of this if someone's hurting you. And not to try to be, sometimes parents, especially if it's a relative, they want to be protective of that relative who's actually doing some really hurtful things. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to prosecute or like, get angry, but it just means that you have to listen to your child very carefully and let them know that their worries are valid and the steps that you're going to take. Yeah, but if if you think a little bit about, you hike up to the top of a mountain and now you want to get back to the parking lot and you say, well, wait a second, how did I get here? You say, well, I started down there and now here I am. So if you think about like, I wasn't always self-critical. I wasn't always self-judgmental. I didn't always have self-disgust. When did this start? So if you ask yourself, when did this start? What is the messaging that I'm getting? How much of it am I believing? How much am I believing that maybe it's true? And by the way, I mean, we do screw up at times, and that yeah, there might be some flaws that we all have. I mean, all of us, and maybe we can say, how can we do this differently? How can we behave interpersonally in a more effective way? But that once it becomes this sort of automatic self-deprecation, is to think like, wait, what happened? Maybe it was a relationship that you had. Maybe it was, maybe, I see a lot of parents judging themselves for their parenting and then beginning to hate themselves for their parenting because their child isn't turning out the way that they had hoped. And it's not a reason to hate yourself. It's a reason to do things differently. But it's when you're coming with some sort of automatic judgment, like I'm to blame, I'm a terrible parent, like those aren't helpful. Um, uh, 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 um, uh, those aren't helpful. And so what you want to do is you want to challenge like those kinds of statements that are driving you further into that self-critical hole that could, eventually maybe become, and the other thing is like, I've often seen like maybe say it's a grandparent saying to a parent like, you're a terrible parent, like the way you're parenting your children is terrible. I mean, it may be ineffective, but no parent wants to have an ill child. So it may be ineffective. And so maybe you could say, hey, that doesn't seem so effective. Like maybe there are other ways to do something, but not, not like, oh, my parent must be right. I am a terrible person. I am a terrible parent, and I should just continue to do, I should do something different. I should listen to them. But what are they learning from that grandparent? Maybe that they should just yell at their children and tell them that they're terrible children. So it's like, where are you getting your advice from? Is the person that you're getting your advice from somebody who brings you joy, brings you a sense of purpose, brings you like lifts you up, or somebody who makes you feel even worse about yourself? Never, ever, ever take advice from somebody who makes you feel worse about yourself, or for somebody who's unhappy. I often see like very unhappy people giving people advice. It's like, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. Saying, well, if you were doing those things and you're so unhappy, why should I take advice from you? But we often get advice from people who are miserable just because we think that they know better, but they don't know better enough to not be miserable. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And at this point, I think we're going to bring Kathy again for more questions from the audience. Kathleen, I'm sorry. Oh, you're on mute.
Mute, eh?
There we go. Sorry. That's okay, Mike. My mom calls me Kathy, so we're good. Yeah. Lots of questions here. Okay, so the biggest question that has come through about 10 posts is what helps?
Mhm.
Does the book address ways to help us as parents? And I'm going to include siblings and other other caregivers to actually help our loved ones to see themselves differently. And then a few people mentioned DBT. They mentioned other types of treatment. Some of them have talked about validation, all those things. What does help to?
Yeah. Well, so I've got a section in the book about like strategies of what helps and what doesn't help. Why is it so hard to tackle? And things like that. So I've actually got a section on that. Now remember, this book is I'm speaking to a person with lived experience. So maybe if depending on what happens with this book, maybe the next one would be, I hate myself, like advice for parents. So there's not specific like, okay, this is what a parent should do. But in terms of what helps, because that's the key question, is the most important thing is to create a wedge between the idea that of the self and the belief that self-hatred is true about them, that it is as true as your lungs, as your esophagus, as your stomach, etc. And so the first thing is to create that wedge. And the only way to create that wedge is to start by questioning its origins. Like, where did it start? And if you think a little bit about, I mean, I forget if it was Galileo or Copernicus or whatever, they said the Earth is very smart people will be able to tell me like that the Earth is the center of the universe. So that's everybody believed that that was true until we started to say, wait a second, is that actually true? What's the evidence that that's true? When did we start believing that? What do the calculations show? So you want to start eroding that idea. Now, even though there's not necessarily advice for parents and advice for therapists in here, explicitly stated, I haven't said, okay, this is advice for parents and this is advice for therapists. Embedded in the exercises that I have throughout the book are ideas that parents and therapists can actually use to help their loved one with self-hatred. So really, I'm speaking to those with lived experience. If you know somebody's got lived experience, this book is for them. But there are lots of ideas because I also sort of think, okay, if you as a parent are doing this behavior, like, wow, yes, I do that behavior. I insist that my child always get A's or whatever it is. Wow, maybe that's feeding into their self-hatred. So maybe I need to stop doing something like that. The problem is that, so DBT is such a powerful treatment, and I know that like Family Connections and other systems like that are based on DBT. The problem is that DBT does not help to change something that DBT will help with certain like cognitive distortions. Sort of the idea. So I'll give you an example. Let's just say that somebody says, my boyfriend didn't call, my girlfriend didn't call, they really don't like me, they must be dating somebody else. And then you can say, okay, let's just test out that evidence. We speak to the person, or you challenge that thought, and like you say, wait a second, they didn't call you back because they were in school or their phone was lost or whatever it was. And then you can say, oh, you know what, I realize that I tend to misinterpret people's behaviors. And then you can, so you can challenge that way of thinking using cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, DBT techniques like checking the facts, like mindfulness, etc. But Mike, how tall are you? 6 foot what?
6'3.5".
No amount of
Maybe
DBT is
6
going to
foot.
get you, no amount of DBT is going to get you to believe that you're not that. I'm not going to be able to say you're 5'4". It doesn't matter, because it won't matter if you truly believe that that's just the case. It's just, so that's what I'm saying. It's like DBT cannot, and none of these other treatments. And I tried MBT. I was trained in mentalizing based therapy, psychoanalytic therapy, family systems and all of these sorts of things. And I gave it my best shot with all of these other methodologies, and it just wouldn't shift. It had to start, and in part because the belief system started so young. Si de repente empiezo a hablar con ustedes en español, no me van a entender. ¿Por qué? Porque estoy hablando en español. You say, what language are you speaking? You're speaking a different language. I never learned that language from when I was young. When I was young, I was learning English. I was learning French. I wasn't learning Spanish. So then it's like, of course you're not going to, like, wait, what is he talking about? He's not speaking a language that I understand, because you learn from very young. You're not questioning why you speak French or English, because it's just part of your makeup. So that's the problem with using a lot of these technologies, is that you believe it's part of you. So how can that change? So you have to start with the idea that you learned it, and that you can begin to erode the false learning that occurred from very young, because it was taught to you by hurtful people or people who invalidated. So what can help is, number one, to start, nothing is going to help until the person recognizes that it is learned. The first thing that helps is for a person to understand that it is a learned idea, that it is not a truth. Everything flows from the idea that it was learned. So what helps is, once they realize that it was learned, is you can, in the same way that you can learn how to do something incorrectly, you can then learn how to do that thing correctly. So once you realize it is learned and that it is not an intrinsic part of you, then you can start to do the unlearning. You can start to say, oh, that was somebody who hurt me. They taught me that I was flawed. I don't have to believe that anymore. So the thing that helps, it has to start with the realization that it was learned. And then you start to do things that are self-compassion. You start to do activities that bring you joy. You start to hang out with people who are kinder to you. You start to do acts of compassion towards other people. But until you realize that it is learned, I haven't found a technology or an idea that changes this. So it has to start there. Yeah, I think, well, so one of, I mean, I remember that I was meeting with a kid recently who was pretty miserable. And I had seen her on the unit all day, and she was laughing and she was joking and we're having a really great time. And anyway, she came and I said, how are you doing? She said, I'm pretty miserable. I said, what are you talking about? Like the whole day you were with your friends, you were laughing, you were joking. And so it's just not true. Now, the problem is that was an invalidation, because that's exactly in that moment that they weren't feeling well. So it would be important for me to understand it. Now, once a person feels validated, they can then recognize that, yes, they were also having fun. And it is true, like people can have fun in one moment and not fun in another moment. So to tell somebody who has core self-hatred is like, you were such a happy child, doesn't undo the self-hatred, because I've actually had many children, many of whom were sexually abused, who were told that they better keep quiet. And so they learned how to mask. So just because somebody appears to be happy, if they're telling you that they're miserable and that they're struggling, it doesn't mean that during that entire period they weren't terrified. And many people who come to my program are excellent maskers. They mask the emotional pain that they're in. So I think much better, if you're starting to see those self-critical, self-judgmental, people-pleasing behavior, is to like sit with them and just saying, hey, what's going on here? Are you how do you feel about yourself? I'm actually not that happy. Tell me more. Like, be curious. Don't challenge it. Don't say, no, you're not. Like, you're a loved person. Telling someone that they're a loved person doesn't change the fact that they feel differently.
So then you would just go out and ask them, do you hate yourself?
I wouldn't say it like at that level at that point. So even when I'm interviewing a prospective patient, I never say, do you hate yourself? I'll sometimes say, how much, doesn't sound like you like yourself very much. Sometimes people will say, well, only in relationships I don't like myself very much. Otherwise, I like myself. Okay, I'm not going to necessarily pursue it too much. But they say, yeah, I really don't like myself. Well, how much don't you like yourself? Not very much at all. Do you ever hate yourself? So you're just saying, like, you can ask the question in a gentler way. I think, do you hate yourself? It's just like too much. And it might not go, well, not so much, I met a mom the other day who's I actually connected her with Lynn, whose 30-year-old daughter had taken her life, and she actually came to one of my talks, and she said that there were like all these pieces missing in terms of understanding what had happened to her kid, and that after listening to the talk, she felt that there was a more complete sense of what she might have been going through. So, do I know for sure? No, but like she felt that pieces that had been missing in terms of her understanding now made a lot more sense, because it later turned out that the child had abuse, and that she had internalized a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, and that she felt that this was something that hadn't been addressed in any of the discussions that she had with the mental health people. So I mean, she found it useful, but do I think everybody would? I don't know. So I've had, I mean, so the youngest person that was helping me was a 16-year-old who really had core self-hatred. She was quite a bright young person. So I was sending her some of the early, sort of chapters, and she found it very, very readable. She was bright, she was certainly bright, and could, but I mean, a parent could read it first if they have a younger child and just see whether the material is appropriate or not. I mean, I have trigger warnings, and I also am very, very clear that suicide is not the answer throughout the book. So yeah. Because it's the work of therapy, and the work of therapy has to be this this element of learning, that realizing that it was learned, that you weren't born this way. But in terms of as a caregiver, I think that I would do three very important things. One is take a deep interest in the things that the child is doing. Now, you know, my one kid likes to play Othello. I'm a chess player and I'm a Scrabble player. But okay, we'll play some Othello, sort of like he likes it as a game. And that's just something like really trivial. But maybe there are trivial things that are not trivial to them, and it's just sort of like engage with them in those things. So that's number one. Number two, when they make statements like, I hate myself, I don't like myself, I'm stupid, I'm terrible, whatever it is, don't dismiss them as kind of like ridiculous statements, like or challenge them by saying, no, you're not stupid, no, you're like, you're wonderful, people love you, and all of those kinds of things. Something is happening in that moment that is leading them to make that statement. So get curious about what has led them to make the statement. And then the third thing is, when somebody feels that way, is to validate how painful and how difficult it would be to feel that way. But you don't just want to stop with validation of how difficult it is, but what is it that we can do to make things different? How can I listen with more compassion? How can I see the wonderful things that the child is doing? And maybe one of the other things that you have to pay attention to, and I've certainly seen this with some families, is like, if you've got a superstar child, it's like, you're going on and on and on about how wonderful this child is. And that the highly sensitive child who doesn't feel very good about themselves might just feel less than, and that they might say, I wish I was more like my other person. Like, are you so over the top with one kid that you're missing out the suffering of another kid? So just just to pay attention to those kinds of statements, maybe spending more time with them. So those are just some ideas of what I would do.
To learn more about tonight's session, to start with, in addition to sending your questions and putting those out for Blaise to look at, pick up a copy of his book, I Hate Myself. Please plan to join us for one of our Sashbear walks across Canada this year. Check the website. The dates will be put up as they get confirmed. Go to the website to make a donation, or right now, get your phone out. The QR code is there if you'd like to make a donation, so that we can continue to provide these expert series, family connections, and so much more. So thank you so much for making the time, for sharing the book with us before it came out. What do you want to tell us or leave with us tonight?
Yeah. I think that we live in a world where we get beaten down, we get exhausted, and I don't know, we seem to have lost some of the joy that comes with living. And I think with people with lived experience of just like that self-dissatisfaction, it can just, it's burdensome to wake up every single day and then just live another day. The people who have transcended this are magnificent people. They stay in touch with me years beyond when I've stopped seeing them as patients, and I see their joy. I've seen the success in their lives, and it brings me the truest of all joys, just to see somebody see themselves in the truth of who they are. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is, there's so many mental health organizations all around the world, all trying to do some really very, very important work. I have been very close to Lynn and Mike since the day I met them. I was there when they lost their just unbelievable child. And they are a force, especially Lynn. I mean, who knows what she's doing? She's probably like doing 6 things at once, like making coffee, like answering emails, like taking care of all these sorts of things because she can do it. And she's just like such a remarkable person. And Mike, Sashbear, all the volunteers. And it's one of those worthwhile organizations. And not to say that the others aren't, but in my experience, the delivery of what they're doing is pretty remarkable and pretty unprecedented. So, it's why I go up every May to do the walk. Let's get 1,000 people there this year. Support them. But yeah, just you are so, for those of you with lived experience who are out there who are listening, you're so frigging worth it. It just like, and I'm not just saying that because, my life's okay. I don't have to say that. It's just that it's true, you've learned incorrectly that you aren't. So hopefully the book will have a lot of ideas that would be helpful. Not all of them. Not everything works for me. Not all exercises work for me. Push-ups do. Sit-ups, not so much. So, yeah. So go in love. I'm sending a lot of loving compassion to all of you. Sasha's heart is with us today. And she'd want this very, very much. I think she's smiling. I still hear her throwing oranges at my door. The color of the book is orange. Sashbear is orange. Jewel, who wrote the foreword based on eating an orange. So here we are.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Take care. And again, Happy New Year.